Creole. Bienvenue Creole Handmade for another Friday. And last week we had part one as we delve into the book, a very special book on the people, the indigenous Kalinagos of Dominica, First People, Resistance, Refuge, and Revival, a book by Dr. Lennox Church, who have really done so much work, spent his entire life documenting our history. We dealt with part one last week with the kind compliments of Digicel. We will be doing the second part virtual, and we are here with the kind compliments of Digicel, and we want to welcome all our Facebook and YouTube viewers. Welcome to part two, where we connect Dominica to its history. It's a pleasure once again to have the doctor. Very busy doctor, I must say. But he found time to actually spend another hour with us and once again educate us on that book, which is available all over, in particular Jay's bookstore, and you can also get it at Amazon. The name, once again, Resistance, Refuge, Revival, the indigenous Kalinagos of Dominica. Let's say good morning to Dr. Lennox Church. Good morning.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me and see me clearly.
Yes, we are hearing you loud and clear, and we're actually seeing you getting younger by the hour. How are you, Doc?
You're starting now? I mean, we're online and everything?
Yes, we are on right now. We're starting live. See if we can steal a few minutes because it's very important where we actually, bring as much information as possible on this part too.
Good, fine.
So last week we dealt with the resistance, refuge, and revival, and this week we're going to delve into other parts of the people, the Kalinago, the first people. Where are we going to start this morning before we actually delve? Because I know I want us to discuss certain areas, in particular, the names that are left with us today, sometime later on, and the influence of the Kalinago language on our Creole language, and also the respect, because we started, when we ended last week, we ended with the respect of the Kalinago people, and how they are treated, they used to be treated, and things have been better. And also the relationship between the chief, the Carib Council, and also the PAL rep. So where do you want to take the first ball?
All right. Well, let's deal with perhaps the beginning of the territory in its official form.
Yes.
And then we will go on to the things that all Dominicans have inherited from the Kalinago people in terms of language and names and that kind of thing.
Okay, no problem. Okay.
So maybe what I'll do is go back to 1894. So that's what, well over 120 years ago, 125 years ago. What happened is that Dominica was always considered to be a kind of difficult place to manage. All the British governors would say that it's a very difficult place. It's not only the fact that the communities are separate, they're widely scattered, and there's all the mountains, and it's difficult to communicate because there are no roads. Remember, roads, and particularly motorable roads, only came in within the lifetime of many of the older Dominicans. I am 72 now, but I can remember as a child having to go from Roseau to Portsmouth in a boat because there was no motorable road connecting the north to the south. And that's in my living memory, much less for other people. And then if you get out to the communities on the East Coast, in the areas of La Plaine and Castle Bruce and so, that was even further into the 1960s when motorable road communication was linked up. So let us understand that this country, because of its topography, because of the geology, its volcanic nature, all of this makes it a very difficult country to basically manage. If you were like Barbados or Antigua, where everything is, within a few minutes of each other and has been connected by road for a couple of more 100 years, it's a different kind of society. Dominicans, we know, even in your research with Creole, for instance, Wadix, you
Yeah.
will find slight differences between the Creole of Viecas and the
Mhm.
Creole of Granby,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
for hundreds of years, those people didn't have real much communication with each other. So they may say things in one way in Viecas, but they may say them in slightly different way in Granby, and yet it's the same island. So the same thing happened in the Kalinago times. The Kalinago people of the north coast, that is all going from what is today Portsmouth right around to Kerry and Viecas and even down to Marigot, they had more communication with Marigalant and Guadeloupe than they did with the people who were living down south. And the people down south, Grand Bay, Petit Savan, Delis, and Soufriere, had more communication with people in the north of Martinique, like Grand Rivière and Préchère and Saint Pierre and those places in the north of Martinique than they did with people on their own island. So all of these things, as I said, made Dominica very difficult to operate. And then during the colonial period, you had you had a completely different thing taking over, where the British arrived and they cut up the land for sale. They had lots all over Dominica, could divide it for sale. And then they sold them to mainly British people for plantations. And you had your Maroons, escaped slaves going up into the interior, which was very mountainous. And you had governors, one particular governor, I actually have it in my, I was wondering, I have so many of my books around. He says, he says, and he's writing to England, and he says, look, I am in a very difficult position. I have the French on the coast coming at me by sea. I've got to watch out for them. And then, and I quote him, I have an enemy of a most um, not unusual, no, of a most dangerous kind. I have an internal enemy of a most dangerous kind to deal with as well. And of course, what he was referring to is the Maroons in the hills. So here he was, and all the other plantations along the coast. So they had the French on the outside coming in if they wanted to attack, as they did. And then in the interior, you had the Maroons. And so I have an internal enemy of a most alarming kind. That's what he wrote to England. So it was difficult. And then when emancipation took place and the enslaved people were freed, that's about 14,175 of them. And then you had another 14,000 who were free people. But the problem was that here you had all these enslaved people who were suddenly freed. And the governor of the day, he even said to them, a few days before emancipation, final emancipation in 1838, he said, now you all must remember, the houses that you occupy on the estate and the land that you are planting, that's their little gardens on the estate, are not yours. And I recommend that you continue to work for your former masters. But of course, many of them did not want to do so. So they picked up the pieces of their tikais, their little things, and they went down on the coast, particularly the west coast, for instance, in the areas that are crowded, like Maho and Baud-la-Messe and Joe and all these places. And they established their houses there. That's why we have the crowded villages on the west coast. And then in the east now, they found the borders of the plantations. So Casa Bruce village is on the border between Richmond Plantation and Casa Bruce, in the rugged little valley there that most of Casa Bruce began with. Or if you want, Wesley was on the border between Eden Estate and Londonderry, and so they crowded themselves in the part where central Wesley is today, which is very rough and rugged and has all these little ravines that they're facing now with the construction of the international airport and all that. So there was a crisis there, And there were uprisings when they tried, for instance, that's the British, to establish a land tax, because they put in a land tax on the people because they really wanted all those former enslaved people to be working on their estates. So, so they were charging them this tax. And to get the money to pay the tax, they'd have to go and work on the estates. They didn't want them to be independent farmers earning their own money and living off the land, even without money. And there was an uprising at La Plaine. So you had an uprising at La Plaine where the uh, British ship, the HMS Mohawk, came in to Plaisance Bay off La Plaine and killed 4 people, among them Pierre Collier and others who were trying to avoid paying their land tax. And since that day in 1893, land tax has never been imposed on Dominica. So we must thank those people that there's no land tax in Dominica, except, of course, if you live in a village or in a town, you have house rates and so to help the community. But in other islands, you have every year you've got to pay a land tax on whatever land it is that you own. But they revolted in 1893, and no government since that time has ever dared to establish a land tax in Dominica. Can you imagine if if you had a piece of land somewhere and your family maybe went to England or to North America, and every year somebody had to fork out the money to pay the land tax, or that you really weren't earning much money and you had a piece of land, half of it is on cliff and the other half is in a ravine, and you would maybe have a third that you're able to plant, and you have a land tax. That would be extremely difficult. So Dominica had all these issues, and the whole issue of squatting, that is the descendants of the enslaved, finding a place to squat. A lot of land holding in Dominica is based on squatting, even up to today. I mean, if you go up in Benna Ravine behind Cane Field, you have a fine example of that there and in many other places. And the government has been trying to regularize things up in the back of Fort Collet and all that. So you see for yourself that this was a very difficult island to run. And so in 1893, the end of 1893, the British sent out a commissioner to go to every community and ask the people, what is it that you want? What can we do to solve the problem? And I was looking for the report. I have the report that the man produced. Why is it that the people in Dominica are so ill contented? And even in the book, the book about the Kalinagos, I quote the man where he says, "We have come to find out why Dominicans are more unsatisfied than any of Her Majesty's other subjects." The other subjects he meant was the other people in other islands of the Caribbean. And why are the Dominicans so sort of up in revolt and unhappy and protesting? So he goes around and he asks, and he has these meetings all over the place. And a lot of people are asking for land. They're saying, look, you have to work out a system. And he interviewed also 2 men who were competing for being Kalinago chief. One was Francis Auguste, and the other was Michel Bruni. And both of them actually presented their case for the Kalinagos. We have no school, we have no shop, our roads are bad. And one of them says, that's Bruni, Michel Bruni, he says, "No, my beloved queen, we are not savages, it's poverty. That is our problem. When you all call us wild savages, no, my beloved queen," he's talking about Queen Victoria, it's not savages. It's poverty. We have no school. We have no this. We have no hospital. We have no roads. That's the kind of thing. So when Hesketh Bell, and Hesketh Bell, I remember from last week, is the guy who was the administrator who was sent out from England to manage Dominica and to try to solve Dominica's problems. Um, when he came, he took that report and he tried to resolve certain things. They did provide a school. Um, and then uh, the whole question of the land and the territory. But you see, the thing was that the Kalinagos in their appeal never asked for land. They didn't ask for land because the land was theirs. So how can you go and ask the British government for land when the land is yours already? That's how it is. Okay, you won a battle and you claimed all of Dominica, but we were there before. So all this land holding that you talk about are for the French people or the English people or even for the African people. But we were there first. So we're not bothering to ask you for land. We take it as a given. So they never asked the British government for land. They just asked for facilities and utilities and road and things that would help them. Because in that area of Dominica at the time, and let us remember, I'm going to recap a little bit, that the reason that they ended up there is because it was the most rugged part of Dominica. It was the part of Dominica that the English settlers and the French settlers did not want. It was rejected. So much steep cliffs. And if you put up an estate in a place like Salebia or Maho River or Gilead, I mean, how could you launch your boats and ship your sugar and all that? So therefore, it never actually was occupied by the British. So when the British were pushing out the Kalinagos from all the beautiful beaches on the north coast, like Batibou and Number One Beach by Hampstead and Calibishi and Hodges and Woodford Hill Beach and all these lovely places where it was easy to land, but the British were pushing them out from there and establishing plantations. So they shifted, and then eventually ended up where the area from Bataka going down to Magini is today. And that's where they secured a piece of land. But they didn't have to ask for land because as far as they were concerned, it was their land. So what am I going to ask for land for? But Hesketh Bell realized that with all those newly emancipated people of African descent who did not have land, the Kalinagos were in a way a bit threatened because people from Marigot area, well, in those days, Marigot was called Wares. It's interesting. It's interesting how the plantation of Wares, and we've heard of Wares Flat, was Mr. John Ware. And Mr. Ware owned that portion of land which became Marigot. And Marigot is only named Marigot because of the bay below, which the French all over the Caribbean called Marigot. Like you have Marigot in St. Martin. And you have how many Marigots in places like Martinique and Guadeloupe. And you have Marigot Bay in St. Lucia. But what happened in our case is after emancipation, a lot of laborers to work on the estates like Melville Hall and Governor and Hatton Garden and these places came from Antigua. Antiguans don't know nothing about French Creole. So when they saw Marigot, well, they said Marigot because they are from the English-speaking Caribbean. And up to today, everybody says, well, why you all in Dominica don't say Marigot? I say, well, it isn't the French speakers who occupy that place. It's the English-speaking people from the Leeward Islands. Dominica was part of the Leeward Islands. You only had to hop a schooner and come down here, no need of passport or anything, and you landed. So the plantation was called Wares after John Wares. So Hesketh Bell writes in his book, well, the problem is we have to create a boundary, and it's not a boundary to keep the Kalinagos in. You see, a lot of people mistake it. They think it's the boundaries like in North America, where in the United States, they corralled all the indigenous Native Americans and sent them all over the country up into North Dakota and Utah and all these states and created reservations and kept them on the reservations. In Dominica, it was to keep the potential squatters from Wares and Casa Bruce and elsewhere out, because Bell said these people are coming in and they're taking over land from the indigenous people, from the Kalinagos, Caribs as they were called then. And there was a whole toss-up, and I talk about it in the book. In fact, I have a special chapter about the conflict over boundaries, which exists up to today. And I mentioned last week that on no official map of Dominica will you find, I was going to hold up a map there, but you know a map of Dominica, you will not find any official map of Dominica with the Kalinago Reserve or the Kalinago Reserve printed on it, because all governments have been frightened to print a boundary, because the boundaries basically are still here and there in dispute. There's always another ravine, another hill that people claim. So the governments have never actually printed it on the map. Yes, you find, as I said, tourist maps and other things put the thing on, but not the official maps of Dominica. They're frightened to do that. Every government going way back. So that is why it doesn't exist on the official maps of Dominica. But as I say, the boundaries, and Bell says so, the boundaries was to keep those squatters from that didn't have land, that had formerly been enslaved on the estates in Casa Bruce and Melville Hall and all these places out. Because they thought, here's free land and there are only some quiet Kalinagos on it, so we can just go and take land. And so the boundary was put in place to prevent them from coming and taking the traditionally occupied Kalinago lands. The other thing with the territory we must understand is that its origin.
Go ahead, Doc. Go ahead, because I wanted to ask in terms of can we safely say the Kalinagos now deserve some level of reparation or something like this if they owned the land before? Everything in Dominica belonged to them. Then the Europeans came, the Africans came. So it wouldn't be safe to say that they deserve some level of reparation.
What's that? The Africans or the Kalinagos?
The Kalinagos.
Oh yeah, but that's an interesting point you raise, because there is a committee that was formed quite a few years ago on reparations. Damian Dublin is the chairman, and I was put on it. And I said, look, this reparation thing, yes, it's all sad and sorrowful, but this is a law case. It's a case in law. So you have to have proof. And therefore, what I did and gave to the committee, the two groups, the Kalinagos and the people of African descent. So for the Kalinagos, I listed all of the the two main massacres, the removal of land, the attacks, all of these things. Then for the people of African descent, I put all the hangings, the executions, the enslavement, and all of that. So you've got a record, because as I say, if we're arguing a case like in court, which this is, you have to have full evidence. You cannot just go to a court and say, boy, those people treated me so bad. Where is your proof? Where are the names? Where is it? So in the Kalinago case, that has been put forward, you see. Anyway, the point I was making earlier was that the origin of the territory and the reason why the Kalinagos didn't feel they had to go and ask for land, because it was their land already, and they had settled it like family land. In other parts of Dominica, there are areas in Calibichy and Petit Soufriere and a number of other areas where land is held by all the descendants of a certain family. Okay, so in the territory, when Bell arrived, let's say the Valmonds had a section, and they just accepted that this was a tradition that once you were a member of that family, or even you could be an adopted, or you could be, a very distant cousin, you had the right to farm that area. And if you went away, where you had farmed could be given to somebody else. That was one of the main duties of the chiefs before we had the modern system of chieftaincy. One of the main duties of the chief was to be the judge, adjudicate on who gets what piece of land and who farm. And then you have the complication of
Okay, this is Creole Handbit. I'm not sure if Doctor is frozen or there's a slight issue with his internet. So this is let's might be just an opportune time to take a word from our sponsor. We are here with the kind compliments of DigiCell. So we're just going to actually take a word from our sponsor. When we come back, let's hope that we can continue our discussion with Dr. Leonard Church. Let's take in a word from our sponsor. So, Doctor, we are taking a
okay,
word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we will come right over to you.
great,
Merry
right.
Christmas! Christmas is here at Digicel, and we are serenading all Christmas love. This Christmas, our customers on mobile and Digicel Plus home internet and cable services will enjoy unlimited gifts galore. Every week, we'll be awarding 10 lucky winners of fantastic prizes like cash, vacations, microwaves, landers, TVs, land vouchers, ham, turkeys, smartphones, sofa beds, and sets. Wow! And there is so much more. Now that is what we talk about when we say Christmas. Want to win your share? It's simple. Activate a plan. Switch to Digicel. Pay your bill in full. Sign up to a new Digital Plus home, internet and cable or postpaid account or buy a SIM and join the Digi family. Every day is Christmas over here. Merry Christmas from all of us at Digicel. Digicel terms and conditions apply. Promotion runs now till December 31st, 2024.
This is Creole Handbit, and we are in with Dr. Leonard Church. Just released a book, Resistance, Refuge, Revival, the Indigenous Kalinagos of Dominica. And what we're doing, we're just going through the history as we once again try to educate the listeners of Creole Handbit and the listeners of the big station. Back to you, Doctor.
Yeah, so while we were there on the ad on the um, break, I got the the actual report I was talking about from
Yes.
1894, where
Mhm.
this guy came to Dominica. It's a royal commission appointed September 1893, and then it was issued in 1894 on the conditions and affairs of the island of Dominica. And he had this guy, his name was Robert Hamilton, and he came and went all over Dominica asking people what was their concerns, what were the problems that they wanted to solve. And that is when the two contesting Kalinago chiefs came and put forward their questions, and they said that these are our views and these are what we feel that we need. Now, what is interesting too is that but I diverted from what I was saying earlier. So I'll finish what I said earlier about the fact that a lot of this land was actually before the territory, it was family land. So all those families around the hamlets like Bataka, Salibia, Crayfish River, going all the way down Magini and Saint-Cy and these places. You had land around these areas. And then the chiefs, the former chiefs, would adjudicate and decide, on that land. But all of this area was not for the descendants of the enslaved. And that's what Bell was putting this boundary for. But the report that I have here also ties in the problems that the people of African descent had. And, these people came forward. I will read, I know we're diverting a bit, but I need to explain in relation to the territory what they were up against, that they were Africans who were appealing for land. So we even have a presentation, and I will read a piece of it so you can see for yourself. These are people that actually were still alive and who had come from Africa that came before the commission. So this woman, her name is Fanny and William Firmin in Soufriere, but it is Fanny Firmin, the woman, who appears before the commission, and he writes down what she says. Sir, I am a native of Africa. I was rescued from a slave ship by HMS Griffin sometime in the year 1836, and I was landed on this island. Now, that is when the British had abolished slavery, but other nations, like the Spanish and, of course, the US, still had slavery. And so the British sent out warships to accost the slave ships and free the slaves. So what she's referring to is a case where she had been caught in Africa by Africans and put on a ship to send to Cuba. But this ship was captured by the British Navy off about 60 miles off of Dominica. It was in bad condition. And so the Royal Navy, the HMS Griffin, brought the ship into Roseau, and all of them were liberated. They were freed. And they were housed temporarily in that building that is on the Newtown Savannah. It still has the date 1784 above in stone above the door. Sadly, it was damaged by fire. Nobody's going and restoring it. You see,
Is it the school you're referring to?
yeah, what was the old
Ginger
Rosa
School,
Boys School,
Rosa Boys School, yeah.
and then latterly it was a youth center and all that kind of thing. You see, it is this kind of thing that puzzles me in Dominica. Why should I be the one that is the voice calling for the preservation of these things and trying to get them preserved? And yet the people who are descended directly, I mean, I have a piece of African heritage in me. My DNA shows that, I have from Benin and these places because of my ancestry. But, I'm considered to be a white man. That's what they call me. So I don't want, I say I have my 14% African DNA, but I'm not going to fuss about that. But why are there not people of deeper African descent who are going and saying, look, this building was a building that where people who were liberated from slavery were put as liberated citizens before they went elsewhere in Dominica. I mean, anyway,
Is it a case, doctor? Is it a case, doctor, of lack of information? Because that is one of the main reasons why I have you here, because some of this information is jumbled, and we are still confused as to who we are.
I agree. I agree.
Sometimes, if you don't have the full and authentic information, you may just be puzzled. Because this is the first time I'm hearing about the Ginger School. I knew it was a school before. I know of the date that's marked on top of the door, but now you're linking the historical value to it, and that is where we are different from the French. The French would make sure they spend some money and preserve buildings like these. I'm even appalled at the way we have the Barracoon building. I mean, what?
Well, that's another story again. That's exactly the same, and nobody's doing anything about it. But in this particular case of the, let us call it the Old Rosa Boys School, here's a building that I would hate to see demolished, because what you are demolishing is a very important part of the African history of Dominica. But there are people who don't give a damn, they don't care. And when you say about information, I wrote about this in my Dominica story, which was republished again in 1995. I have made mention of that in booklets that I've done about Roseau. But somehow it doesn't, I don't know whether it doesn't sink in, to people's brains. But anyway, let me get back to Miss Firmin. She says, I am a native of Africa. and was rescued from a slave ship by HMS Griffin sometime in the year 1836 and landed in this island. Now, I had the holding, that's a holding of land on Soufriere Estate from for the last 38 years, of a certain portion of land, part of Soufriere Estate in the parish of St. Mark, which I have cultivated in cocoa, which I have shared with the late proprietor, Mr. Joseph Bellot, in halves. And she goes on to complain that in spite of all of this, he decided to basically take the land over after all the work she had done for the 38 years. And she is appealing to this British commissioner that she could have some land security. But it was wiped out. It wasn't recognized. So she says at the end, she says, I find it hard to be cheated, assisted by the law. The law allows me to be cheated of my 40 and over years of hard work improving Mr. Bellot's property. Now,
Doc,
yeah,
how are we going to compare to present? An African who was actually in Soufriere now wants to own because she was housed there and worked and whatever there. What about us? I mean, the
well,
descendants of those Africans. What level of ownership do we have? Entitlement do we have? I mean, how do we
well,
relate? Yes, Doc.
well, when she said in brackets, it's put there, assisted by the law, that is why she's saying the law is unfair. I have worked for 40 years. I arrived here 30 back in over 40 years ago. I have worked this land for like 38 years, call it 40. And now I am being shoved off the land and I can't even get compensation for my crops or anything. But the law at the time said so. You know who you boy, when I think of this, Dominica, I just shake my head sometimes. You know the person who ensured compensation for your crops if you are given notice and to be given notice for your land? It's Emmanuel Christopher Loblack in 1953 on the estate at Geneva Granby. Because when Mr. Nassif came and bought the land from the Lockharts had leased land out to people for their gardens. And then Mr. Nassif came and bought the entire estate. And many people did not get compensation for the gardens that they had made. And Mr. Loblack, who was from Granby, Mr. Emmanuel Christopher Loblack, after whom the bridge has been named, he went and put pressure through the Dominica Trade Union that from now on, and they passed the law in 1953, that if you have a portion of land, you must be given 2 years' notice and you must get compensation for the permanent crops that you have put on it, whether it's a grapefruit tree or mango tree or whatever. And it's 1953. That's just the other day. You know, I was born in 1952. This is in 1953. And it's thanks to Loblack. And who do we care? You know, there's the old Dominica Trade Union building in the middle of Independence Street there. That step on which so many political parties have talked and so much of the kind of blood, sweat, and tears of Dominica being dealt with. You think anybody cares about that trade union step? That is the step on which, you know, Dominica's future was anchored. That's a foundation. And you mean to say it's only people like me and maybe one or two other people like Bernard Wilshire, poor fella, suffering there now in his illness, and so that would build this up, that would ask for this, that would demand this? Maybe we're just not energized to these things. But I just want to use this case as a case where Miss Firmin
But
is
Doc,
made.
just before you go to that, a thought just hit me. Is it the continuation of brainwashing from slavery that we are still being affected? The symptoms are still affecting us.
Well, to a certain extent, but I would imagine that by now, over 150 years later, you can't continue to use that as an excuse.
Agreed,
There is
but
there.
Doc, we seem to have a new type
Uh,
of brainwashing existing among ourselves, where we are allowing ourselves to be brainwashed by not.
well,
I remember I'm a child of the 70s, and we sought information. We yearned for information. We got the grandma. We tried everything to get information. But no, with what's taking place now, the information is available all over, and we seem to worry about, let's say, the SIBO. We seem to worry about the other aspects of life instead of our roots, what makes us who we are.
well, there you are. You're bringing up a very important issue, like where are we focused? And you talk about the 70s. Sadly, there were many people in the 70s who were very active and vociferous, people like Bill Para-Revere. And I understood from his wife that towards the end of his days, he sort of said, "Have I wasted my time? Because there I am talking, running around Dominica, being accused of being, a Black Power advocate and messing up the society and all that. And I am dying now. He died a few years ago up in Gillett, up in Cottage, buried in Portsmouth. And he's at the end of his life now, and he at that time, and he's saying, "Did I waste my time? I could
But
have been doing."
Doc, I can share those sentiments. I,
Yes.
I am fighting for an aspect of our culture, the traditional, and even the Kedah so which made us so unique.
Hmm.
And the fight is like you feel you are in the Sahara Desert,
Right.
and we seem to like everything else except what that belongs to us.
Yeah.
For some reason, we just seem to figure everything else is better than what we have, Doc. We have
Yes,
those
but
places available to us. We have the histories there. We want to do all kind of things with the history, modernize the history, and take out the value of what it actually means to us as a people.
well, yes, but there's another little thing that affects, and maybe it's a result of colonialism, as you say, and slavery. It is a love of victimhood, a kind of, and we have it in our Creole. We say "sapufeno," um, you know, they pressure on me. Everybody have pressure on me. They don't like me. So you have this victimhood. It's so much easier to be a victim than to get up and fight. Pour me, moi c'est au malheureux. Um, ça fait rien pour ça. That victimhood creates an atmosphere where you don't fight. You don't get up. You don't fight. So that is another aspect of it. Um, uh,
Because we seem to have inherited, those attributes. Because you just mentioned the 70s, which
yes.
was a very revolutionary period in our history. A consciousness was
Mhm.
developed, was created and developed and harnessed, and we are now modernized, so-called modernized. We should have been more effective from what that was laid, the foundation that was laid for us, and we are now more passive. It's like
Well,
something else has taken us from where we are and just dropped us. Like history to us is almost like a stranger.
yep. Well, um, it's a whole issue that is very, very much needs to be kind of analyzed. Why did this happen? I think one of the things too now is that everybody back in the 70s and 60s, a lot of the pressures on people's back. You used to pay $2.50 a year for water, and you got water all year in your house, and you would be quite prepared to go. How many standpipes were there? Every other 100 yards, there was a standpipe in every community. I'm just using water as an example. but the cost of living was much less. And also the whole access to education and all that was different. But now the pressures on a family to bring up their children and to maintain their house, and now you need a car and all that kind of thing. The pressures are so much that you don't want to go and put your head above the parapet and go and shout like those people in the 70s, because you know you'll suffer and your family will suffer. So you keep your mouth shut. You know, that that is basically what's happening now. You keep your mouth
Okay.
shut, because if you don't, you never know. Your sister's shop, your brother's trucking service, something will be damaged and affected. So you keep your mouth shut. But I just want to finish on this thing
Yes,
before we
no
get
problem.
carried away.
Yes, yes, no problem.
I want to show you all how people in those days, I'm talking about the 1890s, pushed and tried their best to resolve issues. Because in the list here, you see the petitions that are coming from other people like Fanny Firmin. She's saying how unfair it was and she can't get a piece of land in Soufriere because she's not even getting compensation for her 40 years of planting. But the man is this man, Sir Robert Hamilton. He has a list of villagers from all over Dominica begging for some land and resolving the land. I'll just read a few. We have petitions from Fanny Firmin in Soufriere, petition from the inhabitants of St. Joseph, the entire people of St. Joseph. They couldn't even write. They got somebody to write and then they put their cross. You know, in those days, you would put your cross just to show, well, you know, I am a supporter of that. Inhabitants from Victoria Village, St. Patrick's, that's Victoria, that is by Daly's. On behalf of the inhabitants of Bellevue in the parish of St. George, inhabitants of Loubier in the parish of St. George, the 15 residents of Meudon Estate, Coulibistry, St. Joseph, Monrachet in the parish of St. Joseph, petition for inhabitants in St. David, and all of that. Other parts of Dominica, Rivière-Siric, Warner, Campbell, all these places, Wares. The people of Wares came forward, Marigot today, asking for some kind of land arrangement. Gallion in St. Mark's, Scott said in St. Mark's. And so the whole thing continues, and it's all recorded here. I don't even know if the archives has a copy. I believe they should. But I bought this book. I was just walking down a street in London, and I saw in an old bookshop this book for sale. I said, wow, here it is, the whole story of Dominica in the 1890s. But the point I'm making is that coming back to the Kalinago territory, in all these petitions, the guy did not ask for land because he considered, that is the chiefs, they considered that it was Carib land. I mean, the whole of Dominica was Kalinago land. So what are they going to ask for land for if the land is theirs? So they'll put the boundary because, of course, from what I'm showing you, there was such a desperation for land. And certainly in parts of Dominica, you had family land situations. For instance, in Calibichy, there's a 70-acre area of Calibichy, and that dates from over 125 years ago, where Benoit Laville, one of the families of the district, on his deathbed, and this happened all over Dominica, on his deathbed, he said, "Moi ka quitte terre là pour mes enfants et ses enfants pour toute la génération." That's how they used to do it. No will. They would say, "Ouvre terre, ça c'est pour mes enfants et ses enfants pour toute la génération." So everybody then, up to now, if you are descended from Benoit Laville in Calibichy, you claim and you put your house. And but it can be very confusing because then you don't have any title deed. You can put your house, but you can't take that and then go and get a loan in the bank because there is no parent title deed for that. And that's happening here, there, all over Dominica in various places. So, in the case of the Kalinago territory, in a way, that was the same thing because it was a giant piece of family land.
But
Um,
were there any conflicts internally in the territory itself with let's say families inhabiting certain areas of other families' lands?
well, that is what was the main jurisdiction of the chiefs in the past, right? That was one of their main things, to be the adjudicator in the territory, to say, well, in all the relationships, come and let's have a meeting. Whose grandmother was there, who is related to who, and who has a right to be there, whether it's Bataka or, as I said, Crayfish River or Sensi or whatever. So when Bell came now and he set up the territory, what he did was he officially recognized the chief. And the chief that he felt had the greatest support was this guy, um, Francis Auguste. So he then, from 1903, when the territory was established, he then put it that this man would be recognized as the chief, and he was going to be given £6, just £6, but in those days it was a reasonable money, to be a stipend, like to be the chief. And so from that time, you get the official chiefs. They were recognized before, going way back to before the time of Columbus. But this is when the British government decided that they're going to recognize these chiefs. Now,
So
following,
at what point, Doc, these chiefs who were then the, let's say, the main government of the territory then,
that's
at
right.
what point did they actually lost that privilege to, let's say, the political system of governance which we now have? And what was the relation from the inception, where we now have a parliamentary representative and a chief and the shifts of power?
Right. Well, okay. Let me just lead on from that. Let us go to the next chief. Now, the next chief, when this guy Auguste was getting old and all that, so the administrator, the British, because by this time the chief business had to be involving the government because they had recognized the territory, the reserve. So it then went into the hands of the administrator, who had to agree on the next chief. So they came to him and they said, "Oh, well, we believe that Jules Corriette should be chief." And in that 1916, Mr. Bell he went on and served in Africa and Uganda and in Nigeria. He came back to serve as governor of the Leeward Islands, and he gave to that chief, Jules Corriette, the staff of office, the silver head with the crown of the imperial crown of Britain on top of it, that is still used today in the territory, 100 and whatever years later. He is the one that sent this, and the sash saying Chief of the Caribs, that all those other chiefs have been using, Charles Williams, and coming right up today to Chief Annette Sanford. That has been used all that time to designate. Now, the wonderful thing about Jules Corriette is, that I have it in the book, is that when he got the staff, he saw the staff as a symbol of power. So he wrote back to the administrator and he said, "Since you send me this staff," and I'm just quoting how he would write it, "since you send me this staff of office, me and my assistants set up a group of rules." So he started the rules. And one of the rules, I mean, really, it wasn't followed there, but one of the rules was, for every child that's born in the territory, I get 2 shillings. Because what he's doing technically is to saying, I'm increasing the number of Kalinagos. So I'm going wrong, and I'm telling everybody to have as many children as they can so we can improve the numbers of the Kalinagos. And for that, you, the governor administrator, must give me 2 shillings for each baby. Yeah. So you had all these things. And then Jules Corriette then got old himself, and they are accusing him of having a black wife. And they then said that the black wife is bringing in all her, as I used the term at that time, her Negro family and her friends to take land in the territory. And so there was an objection to that. But that's all in the history, it's past. And then the next person they chose was Chief Thomas Jolly John. And that's when you had the big Kalinago War under Chief Jolly John. And that's why the playing field in the territory is named Jolly John Park after him. So you can see the process, but I'm coming back now slowly to your question about parliamentary representative. Now, in those early days, from 1924, because we lost everybody, whether you are rich or poor, they lost the vote, the right to vote for many years. And then in 1924, we got the right to vote again. That is basically 100 years ago, we got the right to vote. And also women were given the right to vote. Okay? So, but this was for a much bigger constituency. This was for a constituency called the Northeast constituency. And that was all the way from Penville to Montjean. Can you imagine? The whole of the parish of St. Andrew and the parish of St. David. And I know that only too well because my grandfather with my same name, Lennox Napier, he was the PAL rep for all those areas. And then he was getting sick and ill. He was going to die. And so he wrote a letter, I still have it, to the constituents. And he said, well, I have to resign because of my health, but I would like you all to support my wife. And her name was Elma Napier. So in the elections of 1940, she then took over from him as the PAL rep. And her most important constituent was the then chairman of the Kalinago Council and known as Chief, George Frederick. So she had to relate to him a lot. So that's why in her papers, all the letters between the chiefs, Jolly John and everybody, I have those because they were least, what should I say, when she died, I inherited all those letters between the chiefs. So both my grandparents were the representatives, but it wasn't just for the territory. It was for the whole two parishes, all those people in Marigot, Wesley, Calabishi, going all the way up to Viecas and Penville and La Ho and those places. So anyway, that is how it existed. So the people who represented the Kalinagos were not Kalinagos, and they were not specific to the Salibia constituency. Eventually, in 1974, the number of constituencies in Dominica was increased from 11 to 21. And the Salibia constituency was created. And therefore, you had the first Kalinago in the 1975 general election elected. He was a member of the Dominica Labour Party. His name was Lawrence Daru, and he became the first Kalinago representative in the House of Assembly. All right, keep that there. Let us understand that now a new thing has burst on the territory. Who is the most important, the chief or the PAL rep? Now, in law, the PAL rep has essentially more power than the chief, because as we see now, the PAL rep is in the legislature. The PAL rep can be made a minister of government. We have that now with Kozia Frederick. And the PAL rep could maybe even become prime minister at some date in the future, and also is in cabinet and essentially is related to helping to pass the laws of the country. But an interesting thing and a fact is that as far as the international world is concerned, they don't really focus too much on who the PAL rep is, what they want to meet. Up to the other week there, the person they want to meet and to talk to is the chief, because the chief culturally and historically has sort of a greater attraction, a greater impact on their minds than a common pal rep. But in law, the pal rep has more power, but the chief is more recognized both locally and internationally because here is the chief of the last of the indigenous people in the Caribbean. So they have got basically to balance themselves very carefully and diplomatically. And at present, we have a situation which, in many cases, we didn't have before, where the PAL rep for the Salibia constituency is a minister of government, and he is a member of the ruling party, the Dominica Labour Party. But the chief is a well-known supporter of the opposition United Workers' Party and has actually served as a senator and came very close to being elected and had contested the chief elections the last time and came very close indeed. And now she is the chief.
Can
So,
the chief, as chief, go up for general elections for a political party?
yes, in law, there's nothing in the legislation to say that a chief cannot contest. But you see, traditionally in the past, in the 20th century, since the territory was established, there was a kind of diplomatic thing, particularly since 1974, when the Salivia constituency was established. Kind of diplomatic thing. Well, the chief will be rather like how the president is supposed to be. He's not supposed to really
Ceremonial.
side with any party or other. But the PAL rep, of course, obviously, will be, as has happened in the past. We've had Freedom Party PAL reps, we've had Labour Party PAL reps, and we had UWP PAL rep at one time, Mr. Barry, and so. So, it's an interesting thing. If you read the laws, there's nothing to prevent a chief from becoming the PAL rep as well. But this would be seen as like, I don't think a lot of people would really feel happy with it because.
Okay, Doc, and as we wind down, I want to give you the opportunity once again to tell us where the book is available locally and also online.
Okay, well, locally it is available at Jay's Bookstore. That's, of course, on Independence Street in the middle of Roseau. It's also available at a little shop in the covered area of the old market, the Daubeny market, that is called Zeb Creole. So you can buy the book there. And if you are leaving Dominica and you want to take a book for your relation, it is in the departure lounge at Douglas Charles Airport. So
in 120 seconds, Doc, what lessons can we presently, the inhabitants of Dominica, now learn from the Kalinago and Carib experience?
Oh, well, the important thing is to understand the past and understand the role that they play. Because, as I say, they have passed on to all of us of whatever ethnic group that are Dominicans, have passed on aspects of their language, aspects of their understanding of the island's nature, all of those things that they possessed were passed on to other people. Knowledge of the trees, of the herbs, medicinal plants, all of these things are thanks to the indigenous people. So this term that was used in the early 20th century of Malquaib and all that, that has to go. That has to be wiped out. There is a particular characteristic, a particular heritage that they have, but all of us have inherited it also. Because,
what about the resistance? What about the resistance?
Well, what I think, and this is a whole controversial point, as far as I can see, and Dr. Dr. Coffey, who's a vet, he told me, look, we have in the territory now all of the expertise and the trained people. We have lawyers, doctors, we have airline pilots, all of these people. that could run a small island state. If you gave us an island, all of us Kalinago people would have all the expertise and trained people to run. And that is why I feel that what has happened among the Kalinagos since the 1970s is those other Dominicans, they can jump high, jump low, they can say what they want, they can criticize us and call us names. We are going ahead. Huh?
So technically, a state within a state.
Yes, that's that chapter I have, a colony within a colony, but now it's but, and I don't want to overstep my time, but Brian Alleyne, when he was Minister of Home Affairs, and Eugenia Charles was constantly warning against this and saying, you all are not, when you all start talking, there was a chief that talked about the Carib nation, but you all are not different. All of us are one. All of us are part of the nation of Dominica. Don't go start saying, oh, you're exceptional and you are part of a nation within a nation. And whether you like it or not, I'm just saying that historically that was their view. And Ms. Charles used to voice it from time to time. You cannot go and say that you are outside of Dominica, outside of Dominica's jurisdiction. So there was controversy there. That's a whole discussion on its own.
Okay, Doc. I really want to thank you. We'll have to try and see if we can do a part for sometime in the new year, if God willing, because we didn't talk about the canoes, the baskets, the cassava, and so many other areas. I would have loved to touch, even the impact on the Creole language.
Yes.
The California had the language, how, and a thing that really puzzled me is how they eventually arrived at their present surnames and names.
That's all in the book. And this is the dictionary, the Kalinago Français, Dictionnaire Caribe Français, that has all the original words in it. So
absolutely, Doc.
That's a whole
Thank
discussion.
you very much for your time. We will arrange for us to have a part 3 where we could go to, because this is very important. And if you notice, based on the feedbacks I'm seeing on Facebook and the messages I'm getting, people are aware, are sensitized now to who we really are. And maybe the majority of us, so more than 60-70%, have some Kalinago linkage in our DNA.
Well,
Thank you very much.
That's what I have in the book.
For the Creole admits. God bless you, sir. Continue to be one of my mentors, and I really, really love you and the work that you've done for Dominica. Another Creole admit.
Thank you.
On the big station, the news comes up next.
Great products. Papou a wete ba moun plen la yo manja kite la pi.